How do you make characters' dialogue sound more natural? Well, here are 5 ideas. Hi, I'm Carly Stevens. This is Carly Stevens Books for all things writing, publishing, and indie author life. So one thing that can be really challenging, especially for writers who are not as experienced, is just making dialogue sound more natural. This skill of writing natural dialogue can vary from person to person, even project to project or character to character. But if you're feeling kind of stuck, here are 5 things to consider that might help you create more natural sounding dialogue, realistic dialogue that draws in the reader and makes them care about the characters and be intrigued by what they have to say. So first thing to remember is that not all people talk the same. I know that we all have defaults. We tend to use a voice that is similar to our own for our characters, but people don't all speak the same. They have different backgrounds, they have different preferences, they have different, even things like age and gender can have a significant impact on the vocabulary that people use and the ways that people speak and the slang that they employ and that kind of thing. Now, that isn't to say that someone's background determines the way that they speak. If you have, friends and siblings and all of that that are kind of in the same generation and age and race and all of that, there is not one size fits all for a certain background. That is reductionist and stereotypical. However, it would also be a lie to say that that doesn't have some sort of impact. So consider, what is the age of your character? What generation are they from? What fandoms are they a part of? That might influence the kinds of references that they make or word choice that they have. I throw in office references into everyday conversation all the time. So what are some of the individual tics that your character has? Now, if you're writing something that is more speculative and not something that's set in the current day, then you might have to think outside the box a little bit more. You're not going to have 60s slang versus 90s slang to work with. So think, what are some of those things? In the Tanuin Academy series, for example, I have just slight tics that are different for all of the main characters. So I just got to know them better through the way that they would speak. Bard, for example, tends to hesitate, repeat himself, use filler words, whereas Kyria, who is a princess essentially, speaks with much more poise, but she's also younger, so it's not this perfect veneer of professionalism. But she tries to be very, very careful with the ways that she speaks about other people, for example. So consider, what are those tics that your characters have? Number 2, cut out trite small talk when you can. So when I say trite small talk, I mean, hey, good morning, how are you? I'm doing great, how are you? Oh, I'm good too. Weather's nice today, isn't it? This tells us nothing about the plot. It tells us nothing about the characters. It moves nothing forward at all. It doesn't give us anything juicy to sink our teeth into. So I would recommend cutting all that out, unless you are trying to emphasize how awkward an interaction is. Then, of course, that's fine. There's an exception to every rule. There's a way to use, to go against the rules that I'm saying in a way that is actually really good. But most of the time, all of that is just slowing down your story and making it boring. So cut out that trite small talk, cut to the chase. The chase does not need to be external plot points that they're constantly discussing. That can just be something that is unique to them, to their situation, to their personality, just something that isn't generic and trite and boring. Think about, for example, at the beginning of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, there is a moment when Gandalf and Bilbo meet each other, and Bilbo says, "Good morning," and Gandalf replies,
"Do you mean to wish me a good morning, or do you mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or perhaps you mean to say that you feel good on this particular morning."
And he goes through this whole list of possible interpretations of the words good morning, which tells us so much about the character of Gandalf and subverts those expectations of what could have been a trite and boring conversation. So for a first draft, if you have some of that in there just to kind of get the ball rolling, that's fine. But your story is going to be better off if you get rid of those trite small talk conversations. Okay, number three. Number three is often the difference between what you see with more seasoned writers and what you see with newer writers that are still feeling some of those growing pains of not quite understanding how to make their story flow. So people will rarely say exactly what they mean. So if they're too on the nose, then that can come across as false. So what do I mean? So when I say people rarely say what they mean, we all have filters, or we should, have some filters in what we say. Very rarely are we explaining every thought very clearly. Often we don't really understand our own emotions well enough to just explain what's going on inside of us if we have this reaction of anger or sadness or something like that. So you also have people who lie, who manipulate, who have ulterior motives, who would rather eat a hamburger than save the world, and so they're trying to kind of go over there. So if characters are too clear about exactly what's going on in their heads, exactly what needs to be said in the moment about the plot, and there's really no stuff around the edges, it's all very on the nose, very straightforward, and nothing else, it's going to come across as sort of clunky, like you're moving these characters almost like puppets through the story, because we as people are, even if we're people of integrity and we do not try to manipulate situations and lie and that sort of thing, we still don't always say exactly what we mean. We'll soften things, we'll go on tangents. There's just this naturalism to the way that we speak that is not just forging ahead in the clearest, shortest point between distance between 2 points, if that makes sense. So to make this a bit clearer, you can practice by having a conversation, so just the dialogue between two characters, so you don't even need to write tags, this is just an exercise, right? So you have two characters, somebody says something, somebody says something, somebody says something, but you start off with a question, and the conversation proceeds with questions being asked kind of regularly, but nobody directly answering the question. Instead of answering it, they're going to talk around it. Maybe they'll ask for some clarification. Maybe they'll ask a question back. Maybe, it's not that straightforward question, oh, here's answer, and scene is done. Instead, make it more of an improv kind of exercise where you have somebody asking a question and then somebody not directly answering any question that's asked. What we learn is more about the interior life of your characters, the way they feel about that question, maybe reasons why they don't want to answer it directly, the information that they find more important, all those kinds of things that still move the plot forward and let us know what we need to know, but without making it feel too scripted. If that, hopefully that all makes sense. All right, the fourth thing to consider when you are creating more natural dialogue is what is the relationship between the characters that are speaking. This, of course, gets more complicated the more people you have in a conversation, in a room, but let's just assume we have two people, right? There is going to be a difference between how a parent speaks to a child versus how friends speak to each other versus enemies, how they would speak to each other versus people who are falling in love versus whatever. So consider, what is the relationship between these characters? That also is going to affect the way that people want to be perceived, the information that they're giving, how comfortable they feel being themselves around this other person. Are they speaking in commands? Are they trying to wheedle into the good graces? You know, there is a lot to consider just in the relationship, you know, love, power dynamics going on with your characters who are speaking to one another. So think about that. Are they intimidated? You're going to speak differently if you're intimidated. You know, if you're terrified, you're going to maybe not say anything at all. Maybe you're going to repeat yourself a little bit. If you're trying to impress, maybe you smile and agree with everything that the other person says. Maybe you try to one up the other person with your experiences, or just something to think about. Nobody speaks exactly the same way to every person in their lives, nor should they. It's makes sense to have a certain amount of authority over some people and deference to other people, and you know, whatever, just based on whatever situation you might be in. And then finally, number 5, something else that can differentiate a beginning writer from somebody who has a little bit more experience is the use of body language. Conversations are not just what is spoken aloud, but it is tone of voice, it is whether or not they're making eye contact, it's are they crossing their arms, are they shifting their weight, are they, you know, trying to kind of be seductive? What is the body language of the person in the midst of that conversation? So not only is this good to consider in general, but it also can improve the flow of your writing if you have more than just the dialogue, but you have action beats punctuating that dialogue as well. So an action beat is just what it sounds like. It's an action, a reaction, that sort of thing, that is just given its own place in the story. So yes, there you go. 5 things to consider that will help your dialogue become more natural sounding and get readers more on the side of the characters because they feel more like real people. I hope this was helpful for you. If it was, then definitely subscribe, hit the notification button, like this video if you like it. You can also find some writerly resources on my website, carly-stevens.com. So you can head on over there if you want to find, there are a couple free resources and some reasonably priced other resources as well. If there is a resource that you would like to see over there that is not yet in the catalog, just leave me a comment down below. Until next week, I'll see you next time.